Almost every business leader is discussing what role AI will play in their company. For manufacturers, AI is considered to be foundational to the move towards Industry 4.0. However, most manufacturers are not quite sure how to specifically apply AI to their operations, how to go from theory to practical application. Meet Bryan DeBois, Director of Industrial AI at RoviSys, one of the largest independent global systems integrators focused on manufacturing. Today on A Seat at the Table, he'll be answering some of the questions manufacturers have about operationalizing technologies such as AI, data infrastructure, and advanced analytics, and how they can boost productivity for manufacturers. Bryan will be discussing how smart factories are transforming the manufacturing industry with data and AI, how to start a digital transformation journey for medium to large manufacturing companies, how to integrate a new data pipeline into an existing infrastructure with minimal disruption to its operations, and the key role humans will play in new tech-driven operations. Despite all the advancements in technology, people still play a vital role in the success of a business. That's why top companies invest in getting the best talent on board. However, finding good people is not always easy, especially when you need people with very specific skills or experience, such as with new technologies. That's why leading companies turn to AsiaNet consultants to help them recruit that winning talent that will give them a competitive edge. AsiaNet has decades of experience and a vast network. You can find out more about AsiaNet consultants over at their website, asianetconsultants.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. Meanwhile, let's find out about the future of manufacturing with Bryan. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us here on A Seat at the Table. I think what you're talking about with regard to AI is increasingly top of mind, and so it should be for anyone in manufacturing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's interesting. So if we look back at, we started this division in 2019 at RoviSys, this industrial AI division, and I was made the director of it. And one of the concerns I had at the time is there was no question that this is where everything's going. But the question was, are we a little too early? And real quick story. So I had a meeting with a customer right after we created this division, and we were talking about AI, and they bring out two of their data scientists that were already building neural networks with the data that they had from the plant floor. And it was in that moment, I remember, I'm like, oh, we're not early. We're right on time on this wave. And so, and then there's no question that it's just going to become increasingly more important for customers, particularly those customers that are, in highly competitive, even commodity markets where they need to differentiate from a market full of competitors. And so this industrial AI gives them that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, certainly the pandemic made everybody very aware of the importance of having resilient supply chains. And that, of course, starts with manufacturing, to be able to move very quickly, to be adaptable, to be able to predict where a problem is, as opposed to just being aware of it once it happens. The concept of digital twins. So there's been a lot of talk, but now a lot of companies are starting to realize we have to get beyond the theoretical, and, we have to start finding a way to apply this to our business. So I think that a lot of the questions for people are trying to understand, maybe first of all, how are smart factories transforming the manufacturing industry with data and AI, more than just the big picture, but maybe if you could be a little more specific.
Yeah. And so this is something that, while I think it's maybe gotten more attention from the outside world, I mean, I've been in this so I started at RoviSys. I've spent my whole career there. I've been there for about 23 years.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so I've kind of seen this whole thing. So while smart factory is something that the outside world, like you said, with disruptions like the pandemic have brought it to the forefront, and supply chain and things like that, it's something I've really been living for my entire professional career. And so we've been working on smart factory for a long time. Now, I will say that in the early 2000s, it was more about bringing digitalization to the plant floor. The plant floor was still very, very manual. And so we were doing things like manufacturing execution systems, which kind of direct all of the other operations that are happening on the plant floor. We were doing work on data collection. So we use these specialized time series databases called historians on the plant floor that collect all the massive amounts of data. I used to say that, we were doing big data on the plant floor before IT really even had a term for it, because everything on the plant floor could provide, hundreds and hundreds of data points. Now it's like thousands of data points, from any piece of equipment on the plant floor. So, the smart factory journey has been a long one. However, what's been interesting, and so I don't know if you've heard the term Industry 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution. It kind of more originated in Europe, but that my take on it is that I think when we get to the end of the fourth industrial revolution, what we'll find is that the point was AI. If that makes sense. Yes. The journey was to get to an AI future. So to your point, absolutely. I think that the smart manufacturing, this journey to get to an AI future is absolutely going to be critical. One of the other things that's been interesting, though, is that the pandemic kind of revealed was this issue of labor, and not having enough folks who want to do these factory jobs, and my customers are struggling to find folks who enough people to work on these lines. And so one of the big drivers of this automation and AI is just because they don't have enough people. They have very experienced. I was up talking to a vinyl manufacturer in Canada a couple weeks ago, and he said, I have 2 operators that had been operating this line for about over a decade. And both of them are probably about 5 years from retiring. And he's like, I don't have a bench after that. I don't have anyone. Like, there's nobody else who can run this line as well as they can. And so we're talking about AI specifically because he wants to capture that expertise that those retiring operators have on the best way to run that line. So he can take a 1 to 2 year person who, frankly, the turnover rate is extremely high, a 1 to 2 year person who may leave anyway, and be able to get that type of performance out of that line.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you discuss it from that point of view, you can really understand how it's more serious than it seems when it's just a hypothetical conversation.
That's right. That's right. And one of the things that I try to, so we hire a lot of people. We grow pretty fast at RoviSys, typically about 20% per year.
Wow.
And so, and we have over our whole history. So, so we hire a lot of new engineers right out of college every year, and they're all excited. But one of the things I try to get them to understand is that, manufacturing is the biggest lever that we can pull to ensure prosperity for the most number of people. Okay. So when you have high quality products that are prevalent, that are cheap, that can be delivered fast, your one guest, Dr. Sheffy talked about, the supply chain. When you have that equals prosperity for the most number of people. Okay. It's interesting. I tell this story to some of these new grads, and you may remember. So when I was young at the grocery store, we had generic brands,
right?
And they were white packages, right? And it just, in black letters, it would say chips,
right?
Or it would say ice cream or something like that, right? And we didn't have a lot of money growing up, and so that was, a lot of times that's what my mom brought home, was those generic brands. Now, if you go to anywhere from a high-end grocery store to, a Walmart or something like that, you're seeing the exact same brands.
Right.
There's no such thing as a generic brand anymore. You've got Tide at, at the Walmarts of the world, and you got it at the higher end, grocery stores and of the world. So, okay. So what does that mean? That's a direct result of the advances that we've made in manufacturing over the last 20, 30 years, to be able to get to that point. So, and that makes everyone richer. So you're right. It's absolutely important. And so I try to stress that. And part of that too is that this newer generation, they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. So it's not enough to say, well, we're helping our customers, shave off, increase some shareholder value or shave off a little bit of cost. It's more important to frame it in terms of, this is really important stuff that we're doing.
Yes, I think it is. And I think that, there's just so much controversy and probably unknowns around AI. We've had a few people on the show discussing AI, and it's interesting when you have people in the industry like yourself because a lot of people either look at it as something that's going to take everybody's job, and so we're all going to be unemployed, or something scary, right? Like robots who are like in a sci-fi sort of a movie, or other people just think it's nonsense and just dismiss it out of hand. So to understand, the practical application is really important. And I think that now, as you're pointing out, more people are embracing the fact that we do have to better utilize technology in order to solve a lot of problems, and particularly labor shortages in certain industries is a critical one.
That's right. And I mean, it's a question I get all the time. I'll be at cocktail parties with my wife, and I'm the director of industrial AI. So one of the first
Right.
questions I get constantly is, "Oh, so you're putting people out of work?" And so I try to address it head on. The reality of it is I've been at this for over 20 years in this industry. We've been applying technology, to these manufacturers that whole time, and I've never once seen one of our projects lead to a labor reduction. It just doesn't happen. The reality of it is that the tasks that we are oftentimes automating, they either don't have enough people to do it, or if they have someone that's doing it, they don't want to do it. Correlating data coming from the plant floor into Excel, I've got folks, at my customers who spend 8 hours a week, putting together these Excel reports and things like that. That's not rewarding work for them. That's not fulfilling work. And so if I can automate that, I can suddenly now improve their quality of life and their job satisfaction. And they can also then take those 8 hours a week that they were spending, and they can allocate it to higher value tasks. And so that's really the message. And like I said, trying to capture that expertise before these people walk out the door. We did a pipeline project. And so if you think about pipelines and moving product, the pipeline is particularly like oil pipelines, the pipeline's never empty. So you always have to have something pushing against, the product in the pipeline. And so it's always full. And so scheduling when that product is going to be delivered at the terminal, the pipeline terminal, is a really complicated problem. And so we were working with a master scheduler for a pipeline company, and he was about to retire. And we were automating what he does and trying to capture his expertise and using AI to try to leverage that. And he was excited to work with us on that because he saw that as his legacy. He had spent his career becoming the best at scheduling, production scheduling on pipelines. And so he was excited to capture that and pass that on. So I think that's a really important aspect of it that most people don't really think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting that you have framed it in that way, because people don't really think about it as being able to create that legacy in a sense. Now, there are a lot of companies that are now starting to think about how do we start to incorporate this into our existing business. And sometimes people don't do that just because it just seems overwhelming to figure out, how do I get started, particularly when you have to keep the business running and you have to make what seems like a very huge transformation. I mean, how particularly for medium to large companies, how do you start that digital transformation journey?
Yeah. And so it's interesting because I feel like RoviSys it takes a very practical approach to this type of thing. And unfortunately, we are oftentimes coming in after one of the big IT consulting companies, which I won't mention any of them by name, has come in and they've said, well, if you just give us 20 million, then we'll digitally transform your business. Right. And so
Right.
everyone now, and so the company has spent some money with them. They typically have halted the project because they don't have much to show after millions have been spent. And then we come in and we go, no, we can actually digitally transform your company. And so we kind of have to get over that, they're gun shy at that point. But the best place to start, and where we always talk to our customers about, is use cases. So we always want to identify what are the pain points that your operators, and it should come from the people who are actually operating that line. They have such great insight. They're there 24/7 working these lines. They know the feel of it when the machine is just finicky one day, or when it sounds a little weird or smells a little weird. I mean, they just know these machines intimately. And so we want to talk to those operators, and we want to understand what are the pain points that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And then we always start with that. We start with the use cases, we start with the problem statements, and then we bring the technology in afterwards. So we say, okay, so how can we then apply technology to try to solve these problems? And if you do it that way, you can knock out some low-hanging fruit. You're not having to spend multi-million dollars, before you see any kind of ROI. You can knock out some low-hanging fruit, some low-hanging projects, and then you can roll that into the next one and the next one and the next one. And to me, that's the right way to approach a digital transformation journey. And that's typically an easier pill to swallow for a lot of our manufacturing customers.
I think it's really interesting that you've pointed that out because it isn't obvious to people. I think people feel that it's an all or nothing, that it's going to be, I mean, it is a big transformation, no doubt, but I think people don't understand what you're saying. They didn't know before that you could do this in chunks, that you
Yes.
don't have to actually transform the whole company at once, that you can actually take subsets of what you're doing and start to do that, learn from that. And I really, really like the fact that you talked about bringing in the people who are actually doing the work, because so often these decisions are not including, or very rarely including, right, the input from the people doing the work. And then when they're implemented, they don't work properly.
That's right. That's right. And, giving them, well, it's funny, a seat at the table, giving them a seat at the table when we are actually from the beginning, because what will happen is that with some of these customers, these failed projects, they have been led by IT, and we have great respect for IT. We represent a different, typically group of people at manufacturers. The term we use is operational technology, or OT. And that's a term that Gartner termed in 2006 to kind of capture what we do down on the plant floor, where we're typically interfacing with physical equipment and things like that. So we represent the OT stakeholder. But these projects, oftentimes when they're run by IT or they're pushed down by corporate, they've never had anyone from operations or supervisors, or in some cases even plant managers. None of them have been at the table during this process. And so then they definitely, there's tissue rejection. And I mean, I've seen it, if the operators don't want a project like this to succeed, it won't succeid.
Right.
They have all kinds of ways of making these systems not look good. But if they can feel like their voice has been heard from the beginning, and that we're really trying earnestly to make their life and their job easier and better, they will bend over backwards to make these projects a success. I think there's one other aspect too that's important to understand, because you talked about how overwhelming the concept of digital transformation can seem, is that it's not a one size fits all.
Right.
So I've seen these projects that have been extremely successful. And I saw we did a project for a midstream refining company. And the project was to build, part of the problem they had is in midstream, you have, their enterprise is very interconnected. So if you have a problem at one factory, you will likely see that problem, because they're all interconnected. You'll see that flow downstream to one of the other factories in their enterprise, right? And so they would have a problem at the upstream factory, and they'd be so busy trying to fix that problem that no one would pick up the phone and call the downstream factory to say, hey, you're going to have a problem the next couple of days coming down the pipe. And so their goal was to build a NASA style command center where they had representation from everyone, all their different sites, all across their enterprise, all in the same room, looking at a giant, massive board of the entire enterprise. They could zoom all the way into a single asset. They had 1,500 compressors in their enterprise. They could zoom all the way into one asset, zoom all the way out, and they could collaboratively solve these problems. And we helped them build that. And what's interesting is we wrapped up towards the end of the year in 2019. And what happened the very next year is COVID hit. So what happened was, while they couldn't all be there in that NASA style command center, all of those tools that we had built, they were able to use and collaborate from home and run the entire operation and see those same gains. Now, if you ask, is that what, maybe one of these big consulting companies would describe as digital transformation? They go, well, it didn't include this and didn't. But for that company, that was transformative. That transformed the way that they operate their company, leveraging digitalization. To me, that's digital transformation by any measure. And so it's not a one size fits all. It very much can be tailored to what each company requires. So.
I think that's really important that you pointed that out. And it's interesting because the vision that, what you talked about in that use case with the client that you work with, really dovetails with a vision for an apparel supply chain that another guest on the show, Christophe Roussel, talked about in terms of what he visualizes as the ideal supply chain in terms of resiliency, in terms of responsiveness, and so forth. So I think it's good you pointed that out. And there's an awful lot of, I would say, statistics, if you would, or feedback from a lot of the big consulting firms about why most digital transformations fail. And it's sort of has soured a lot of people on this because it's a big task. It's expensive to bring in consultants, and now most of them fail. Like, what about that? Sounds like something I want to put time and money into, right?
Right.
So, and then on the other hand, there's pressure that says, digitize or die, so to speak. So it is interesting that you pointed out that it doesn't have to be a one size fits all, as you're saying.
That's right. And I mean, we call it a journey, and that's because it really should be considered that it's a journey to a digital future. And along the way, your goal is to transform the operations of your company. And, so we're looking for wins at every step of the way. And we're looking for, and there may honestly, again, like any journey, there may be a side road we go down with the customer, and everyone at the table thinks this is going to be a big win. And it turns out maybe it's not. But at least you haven't spent millions of dollars at that point. Now you've made a modest investment. And so, okay, so man, it didn't have the impact that we wanted. Let's try this over here. But you're starting small and then you're scaling out. And so we look for those wins, and we look to pilot those types of projects at one or two sites. Find that we had a customer, this was a drywall manufacturer. So the process of making drywall, you lay out the drywall, and then it dries over time on the line. And then you take quality samples from it and you send it off to a lab. And then it may be hours later before the lab comes back and says, oh, guys, you've been making garbage for the last couple hours. And so then you have to scrap everything that you made, and you have to make adjustments to the process, and then you keep going. Well, so it turns out that there's certain correlations. I can't get into too many details, but there's certain correlations with how the drywall is drying that we can visually see that correlate to how high quality the drywall is going to be. And so we were able to build a vision system that looks for those properties. And then we were able to build a machine learning model that immediately feeds that back then to the operators. This is a prediction of what the final quality of that sheet of drywall is going to be. And they're able to make immediate changes then to the process without having to wait hours, without having to make garbage in the meantime for, to wait hours for quality to come back to them. And so we did it at one site. We did it with one team. We started with one line. It was so amazingly successful. And I mean, that they immediately rolled it out to 5 more sites. And those are the types of things that, when you talk about hours of reducing scrap, that moves the needle. That can in certain industries easily be millions of dollars a month in terms of improved productivity. And so, start small, think big, but start small and try things out and see what works. But always have a vision, always have, that's one of the other things that I think we do well, and that I think is important for this whole thing is to have a vision from the CEO on down of what you want this journey to look like and where you're going with this whole thing, right? Don't start with technology. Technology comes in later, but have that vision of what you're trying to accomplish. We've seen great customers that have a culture of continuous improvement. And then we've walked into customers that don't, where it's just about they're really just trying to tread water, and it's always about the problems of the day and putting out fires and things like that. And so I think that's what's important from leadership of these great customers is building that vision and being able to sell everyone on that vision and get everyone to march in the same direction.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. And I really like the fact that you advise people to start small so that they can get some feedback, see how it's going, pivot if necessary, as opposed to going into a massive project and then finding out later that actually something else might have been better. So I think that's really very excellent advice, very honorable advice. And it takes a lot of the stress off companies who are wondering what to do and are spending so much time trying to figure out should they do it, because it is a big investment, right? So
That's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
even if it's not costing them a lot of money, it's still going to be, at least in their minds, disruptive. And obviously, the more money you spend on something, the more pressure there is to get it perfect. So I think that's really, really important that you brought that up and pointed that out to people, because it wouldn't have, it certainly wasn't obvious to me either. I look at these kind of things, and when everyone's talking about digital transformation, I'm thinking, wow, yeah, okay, a lot of money, a lot of time. I can see why it's off-putting to people. Now you mentioned that humans will also play a role in tech-driven operations, and that's interesting, because as much as we talk about how much people can't stand those kind of jobs, or you're sitting at your desk all day entering data, and everyone's like, oh, this is the most soul-crushing work. As soon as you get laid off, all of a sudden that data entry job really looks good. You're anxious to get back to that desk. So what role do you see people playing, and how can companies sort of, whenever possible, start to segue existing people potentially into those new roles?
Yeah. Well, so the role that people are going to play is twofold. And in the short term, we need the expertise that these folks have developed over the years. So we talked about our experts. So the projects that we're doing right now, we have an approach to AI called autonomous AI. And it's really about capturing the expertise of those SMEs, subject matter experts that work for our customers. So that's the first aspect of it, is making sure that we're extracting that expertise from them. And one of the unique things about autonomous AI, it incorporates deep reinforcement learning, but it also incorporates kind of a unique approach called machine teaching, where we actually teach the deep reinforcement learning about what the concepts and skills are, what the strategies are that existing experts in the field use. So for instance, we may, if we're solving a process problem and you talk to an expert operator, they may say, well, okay, so if the tension on this is starting to get high, you'll start to see this, indicators start to go high. And then at that point, you need to make these adjustments. But if the tension is low, I'm going to use this other strategy, and that's how I'm going to operate the line. So capturing that strategy and that decision-making into the autonomous AI via machine teaching is a key aspect of it. So the human aspect of it first is getting those experts in the room and making sure that we're capturing what they do, how they do it, why they do it the way they do it. So that's going to make the AI smarter. But then it's just like anything. I mean, we're going to start to be able to automate then. Autonomous AI, one of the promises of it, and one of the things we've been able to actually see with our customers is that parts of the manufacturing process where you've always had to have a human being in the loop, you're actually going to be able to replace that with this autonomous AI. So that's really exciting, really interesting to be able to do that. Okay. So now you've got portions of the process where you've got autonomous AI doing that. But it's the same thing as automating that report generation. Now we can take those folks and we can put them on higher value tasks. One of the things, and I was listening to one of your other guests who was talking about the limitations of AI. And I think that that's really important. And for somebody like me and like him who kind of works in it and lives it every day, we're very aware of the limitations of AI. And one of the key things is that it's nowhere near as creative or innovative as human beings are. So that's going to be moving forward, that's going to be the key thing that humans are going to be, that we're going to be looking to humans to do, is to provide those insights and that innovation and that creativity that AI is just nowhere near able to do yet.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I do think that, certainly at more of a mass market level, you might say, one of the biggest resistances to AI is just feeling that everyone's going to be out of a job. And probably one of the Achilles heels for companies is overestimating what it can do, because right now, especially, with the launch of ChatGPT, everybody thinks that you can use that for absolutely anything. I mean, literally anything. And they might be rudely surprised that in some use cases, it might really not be what they were hoping for.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, with so I don't know if you've heard, but Microsoft 365 Copilot is going to be coming out very soon. That's going to
Right.
incorporate the Chat GPT technology that Microsoft invested in into Office, and so that's going to be. I mean, it's interesting because as prevalent, I guess it's just because I'm so plugged into technology. As prevalent as this is, I was talking to a customer a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned ChatGPT, and they had never even heard of it.
Oh, wow.
So it's not as ubiquitous as we think it is. But once you incorporate it into Microsoft Office, okay, now
Right.
everyone will have heard of it. And so, yeah, and it's really exciting. And it's great stuff. But what does it really do? So these large language models, what do they really do? They're very, very good at statistically predicting what the next word is. That's it. They don't have any underlying understanding of what language is by any stretch of the imagination. They don't understand what language is. They don't understand causal inferences at all. So they don't understand that this leads to this. They don't even understand what they're talking about. They literally are just really good at picking the next word as based on the terabytes of written word that they've consumed and been trained on. So great stuff. It's going to automate. I'm excited about it. It's going to automate a lot of the just kind of content generation that is, kind of part of any white collar job that is just kind of painful sometimes, and make it look really great. I'm not that great at building PowerPoints. I can tell you right now, I've gotten better over my career because you kind of have to, but boy, I don't like that part of my job. So if I can generate a PowerPoint, okay, so that's great. So now I can generate a PowerPoint that effectively communicates my ideas, but they're still my ideas. ChatGPT is not going to be able to take a division at my company and build a 5-year strategy on how we're going to bring industrial AI to our customers. It's just not going to do that, and that's what I do. And then be able to guide my company and my team of people to get to that future. That's what I do. That's what leaders do. And it's just not going to be able to do any of that. So all of that are still very human characteristics that are going to stick with us. So we got a long time ahead of us still before we're completely replaced.
Well, I think that's really interesting to hear and comforting to a lot of people, especially coming from people like yourself who have spent over 2 decades working every day with AI, on a developmental side of things. Because, as it bursts onto the scene, everybody thinks that it's brand new and that it can do, a million different things. So when we have people like yourself on the show who actually are on the side that's developing it, working with it, understand how it works very technically, it is useful for people. I think a lot of people benefit tremendously from that.
Right. And I mean, and it's not to downplay its capabilities. I mean, you are going to be able to generate whole documents that previously would have taken hours to write by hand. That's really cool. That's more on kind of the knowledge worker type of side. On the operational side where I live, in that, with autonomous AI, we're going to be able to do, operate processes on the plant floor that in the past we could only have humans do. That's a really big step forward. That's a huge improvement for manufacturing, for the lives of, like I said, the people who actually do those jobs, but then everyone that benefits from those manufactured products. So we don't want to understate those huge stepwise improvements that AI has brought. But with anything like that, the hype gets out of control and the fear mongering. It's interesting too. It's disruptive. There's no question about that. There may be job titles that don't exist in 5 to 10 years because of these technologies. But the classic examples, elevator operator, street lamp lighter, these were real jobs that people did. And was it disruptive when automation, changed, those jobs? And yes, it was certainly disruptive, but nobody's looking to go backwards and have street lamp lighters and have elevator operators anymore. So I think it's important to keep our eye on the long term and making sure that, my goal is to make sure that people's jobs are that their quality of life and that they're rewarded by those jobs, that they enjoy doing those jobs. And I also think that there's an important aspect of increasing leisure. I think that, it's interesting. We kind of have this idea of a 40-hour work week today. And that's just kind of, but it wasn't always that way, right? It was
Right.
it was actually a lot more.
Right.
And so I think that we could feasibly see a time when we get to, who knows, a 32-hour work week becomes the norm or something like that. And it's exactly because of these advances.
Yeah, I think that it's really good that you've brought that up. And I think these are things that I myself hadn't really considered either until you started to discuss it. So I think probably a lot of people who are listening to this show would love to be able to connect with you and ask questions specific to their own business. Where can they find you, Bryan? How can people connect with you?
Yeah. So my company is RoviSys, RoviSys. So if you go to rovisys.com/AI, you can find our industrial AI section of the website, or you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. So it's Bryan, Bryan, DeBois, DEB as in boy, OIS as in Sam. And so you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect with anyone.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to include all of that in the show notes. And I would really encourage people who have questions to reach out to Bryan. He's a wealth of information. And, having over 2 decades of experience doing something, particularly something like AI, which is new to most of us, it is very useful to be able to get that kind of one-to-one conversation going.
Yeah, I'm always excited to talk about it. I love it. I live it every day. So yeah, it's interesting to me. So
Yeah, well, thanks so much for being here with us, Bryan.